Marcus had always believed in working hard for the little joys of life. He was not a man who often treated himself to luxuries. Most of the time he traveled in the cheapest way possible, by bus, by economy flights, or sometimes not traveling at all if it was not necessary. But this time was different. After months of saving, cutting down on small things, skipping nights out, and even taking on extra shifts at work, he finally decided to spend some money on himself. He bought a first-class ticket for a flight that would take him across the country. It was not just about the seat. For him it was a reward, a quiet moment to enjoy comfort he rarely experienced. On the morning of his flight, Marcus woke early carrying only one small bag. He liked traveling light. As he arrived at the airport, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Airports were always busy places, full of people rushing, announcements echoing, and lines stretching in every direction. Marcus checked in, walked through security, and found himself at the gate earlier than most passengers. He watched people as they passed, each one with their own story, families traveling with children, business people with serious expressions, and students looking wide-eyed at the large screens showing destinations. When the boarding call came for first class, Marcus stood and walked forward. For once, he was not one of the many waiting at the back, squeezed together in the long line. Instead, he stepped easily through the gate, and the flight attendant welcomed him with a smile. He found his seat near the front, wide and soft, with plenty of space for his legs. The seat reclined, a blanket rested neatly on the arm, and a small screen in front promised hours of entertainment. Marcus sank into the seat, almost not believing this was real. He smiled to himself, thinking of how different this was from the crowded economy seats he had always known. For a moment he closed his eyes, trying to let the feeling sink in. He told himself this was worth all the extra work and saving. He imagined stretching out and enjoying the quiet for the long flight ahead. Passengers continued boarding. Some passed by quickly, their eyes drawn to the large seats at the front, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and envy. Marcus noticed a few glances in his direction. He was used to that. He knew what people sometimes thought when they saw him sitting in a place they did not expect. But Marcus had learned long ago not to let such things trouble him. He sat tall with quiet pride, reminding himself that he had earned his place here. The plane began to fill with the usual rush of energy, bags being lifted into overhead bins, flight attendants guiding people, children fussing as parents tried to calm them. The aisles became crowded, and the steady line of passengers slowed down as some struggled with finding their seats. Marcus took a sip of water and leaned back, watching the scene with patience. That was when he noticed her, a young woman, appearing near the gate, moving slowly down the aisle. She held a bag in one hand and used the other to steady herself against the seats as she walked. Her steps were careful, almost heavy. It did not take Marcus long to see why. She was pregnant, and by the way she moved, it looked like she was not far from her due date. Her face showed both determination and discomfort. She tried to smile at the people she passed, but Marcus could see the strain in her eyes. The bag she carried looked far too heavy for her. She paused often, shifting the weight, adjusting the strap on her shoulder. The passengers behind her grew restless, but she continued carefully, trying not to bump into anyone. Marcus watched as she stopped near a flight attendant, speaking quietly. Though he could not hear the full conversation, he caught enough to understand. The woman explained that she was not feeling well. She needed water and hoped she could sit down soon. The flight attendant nodded sympathetically and pointed further down the aisle, where her seat was waiting for her. Marcus's eyes followed the direction. Her seat was far back, deep in economy class, squeezed between rows that looked completely full. He imagined her trying to sit there for hours, pressed between strangers, with little room to stretch or move. He thought about the long hours ahead and how hard it would be for her. He looked at his own wide seat, the extra space, the comfort that he had worked so hard to give himself. In that moment, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to keep the seat he had earned, to enjoy the comfort he rarely experienced. But another part of him, the stronger part, reminded him of the values he had been raised with. He thought of his own mother and how she always said kindness was never wasted. He remembered times when strangers had helped him, small acts that had stayed with him long after. He shifted in his seat, watching the woman again. She was slowly making her way toward the back, her face pale, one hand resting on her stomach. She looked exhausted already, and the flight had not even begun. Marcus felt something stir inside him, a quiet but firm decision forming before he had fully thought it through. He reached for the call button above his seat. A flight attendant appeared quickly, leaning down to ask if he needed anything. Marcus spoke softly, not wanting to make a scene. He explained that he had noticed the pregnant woman struggling and wanted to offer her his seat. The flight attendant blinked, surprised, as if she had not expected such an offer. For a moment she seemed unsure what to say. Then she smiled, a warm and genuine smile, and nodded. "Are you sure, sir?" she asked. Marcus simply nodded. "Yes, please. She needs it more than I do." The flight attendant walked quickly to the woman, speaking to her gently. At first the woman looked confused. Then she turned her eyes toward Marcus. Their gazes met across the aisle, and Marcus gave her a small nod as if to say it was all right. She hesitated, shaking her head as though she did not want to accept. But the flight attendant reassured her, and Marcus stayed calm, his expression steady. Slowly, the woman began to walk forward again, her eyes filling with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. When she reached his row, she whispered a soft, "Thank you," her voice trembling. Marcus stood, picking up his small bag without complaint. He stepped aside, allowing her to take the wide, comfortable seat he had been so excited to enjoy. She sat down carefully, almost sinking with relief into the cushion. As Marcus walked toward the back of the plane, carrying his bag, he could feel the eyes of other passengers following him. Some looked shocked, others impressed. A few nodded quietly, acknowledging the kindness they had just witnessed. Marcus did not seek any recognition. He only thought about how the woman must feel, and that thought alone gave him peace. He reached his new seat, squeezed between two strangers in the crowded rows of economy. It was not comfortable. The legroom was tight, the air warmer, and the noise louder, but Marcus settled in without complaint. He leaned back against the seat, telling himself this was where he needed to be. Up at the front, the woman adjusted herself into the first-class seat, her eyes closing with relief. Every so often, she turned her head slightly to glance back toward Marcus, and though he did not see it, her hand rested gently on her stomach as though silently promising herself she would not forget what he had done. Marcus tried to make himself comfortable in the new seat he had taken near the back of the plane. The armrest pressed against his side, and the man sitting next to him was already asleep, leaning slightly into his space. A young child in the row ahead kicked the back of his seat from time to time, not out of anger but out of restlessness. The air felt warmer here, and the space seemed to shrink the longer he sat in it. Still, Marcus did not complain. He reminded himself why he had given up his seat, and told himself that the discomfort was temporary. As the last passengers boarded, the flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking seat belts and overhead bins. The plane doors closed with a soft thud, and soon the cabin filled with the sound of the engine starting. Marcus rested his head against the small cushion attached to the seat. He was tired but calm. He had made his choice, and even if no one else fully understood it, he felt that it was the right thing to do. Up in the first-class section, the pregnant woman sat with her hands folded gently over her lap. She kept adjusting herself, trying to find a comfortable position. Her face no longer looked strained, though her eyes carried the weariness of someone who had been through more than she had expected that day. She reached for the glass of water that a flight attendant had brought her and took a slow sip. Her eyes wandered back down the aisle, and for a brief moment they found Marcus again. She thought of how quickly he had acted, and how easily he had given up something that must have meant a lot to him. A stranger had seen her struggle and had chosen kindness without hesitation. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Marcus listened, though he had heard the instructions many times before. As the plane prepared for takeoff, he felt the familiar pull against his body when the engines roared louder and the wheels left the ground. The child in front squealed with excitement, and his mother tried to quiet him, but Marcus only smiled faintly. He remembered when he was young and had felt the same thrill during his first flight. The plane climbed higher into the sky, the pressure changing as the clouds drifted past the small oval windows. People around Marcus began to settle in for the long journey. Some pulled out books, others plugged in headphones, and a few closed their eyes to sleep. The lights dimmed slightly and the cabin became quieter. Marcus tried to stretch his legs, though there was little room. His knees touched the seat in front of him, and he shifted slightly to one side, careful not to disturb the sleeping passenger beside him. It was far from comfortable, but every time he thought of the woman sitting up front, he reminded himself it was worth it. She would be able to rest, to stretch her legs, to breathe easier during the long flight. That thought gave him a kind of peace that no wide seat or soft blanket could provide. Hours passed slowly. Flight attendants came by with trays of food. In first class, the meals looked fresh and carefully prepared. In economy, the options were simpler, served in small containers with plastic cutlery. Marcus accepted his meal without complaint, quietly eating while watching a movie on the small screen in front of him. The screen flickered now and then, but it was enough to pass the time. At one point, the woman up front pressed the call button, and a flight attendant quickly arrived with extra water and a small pillow for her back. She leaned against it with visible relief. For a long moment she sat still, her eyes drifting closed as she rested. But again, her gaze wandered down the aisle toward Marcus. She could see only part of him, the back of his head, his shoulders, the way he sat patiently in the cramped seat. She wondered why he had done what he did. She thought of all the times she had met strangers who ignored her, people who had looked away when she needed help. Yet this man, whom she had never spoken to before, had offered her something precious, without expecting anything in return. Marcus did not notice her watching. He had slipped into quiet thought. He thought about his own family, about his mother who had always taught him to look for ways to make the world kinder. He remembered her words clearly, words she often repeated when life felt unfair. What you give to others will always come back to you in some way. Marcus was not sure if that was true, but he believed in it enough to live by it. Later in the flight, the plane experienced a small bump of turbulence. People shifted nervously in their seats, but it passed quickly. Marcus glanced out the window, seeing nothing but endless white clouds stretched across the horizon. Somewhere far below, the land rolled on, unseen but steady. The hours moved slowly, each one blending into the next. Marcus shifted often, trying to find a position that gave his legs some relief. At times his back ached from the cramped seat, but he bore it quietly. His eyes closed, then opened again, never quite falling into deep sleep. Meanwhile, the woman in the front began writing something in a small notebook she had carried with her. She paused often as though thinking carefully about each word. At one point, a tear slipped down her cheek and she brushed it away quickly, glancing around to make sure no one had noticed. She kept writing, filling page after page, her pen moving slowly but with purpose. The flight attendants continued their routine, checking on passengers, offering drinks, and making sure everyone was comfortable. More than once, one of them glanced at Marcus with quiet admiration. They knew how unusual his act had been. Most people guarded their comforts closely, especially when it came to something as rare as a first-class ticket. But Marcus had given it up without hesitation. The flight dragged on with the steady hum of the engines filling the cabin. Marcus tried to rest again, leaning his head against the small pillow he had been given. His eyes drifted shut, and in his half-sleep he thought about the future. He wondered what stories he would carry with him after this flight. He wondered if the woman would remember his act, or if, like many things in life, it would fade into memory. He did not need thanks, but part of him hoped she would find some comfort in knowing she had been seen and cared for, even by a stranger. As the night hours set in, the plane grew darker. Only a few reading lights glowed above the seats. Passengers slept in awkward positions, some with their heads tilted against the windows, others leaning against family members or friends. The quiet was broken only by the occasional cough, the rustle of blankets, or the distant footsteps of a flight attendant moving through the aisle. Marcus remained awake longer than most. He shifted, stretched as much as he could in the small space, and tried to keep his mind at ease. He thought about how, in a world that often felt selfish and rushed, small acts still mattered. He told himself that this moment, uncomfortable as it was, would stay with him as a reminder that choices made from kindness always had value. Up front, the woman finally closed her eyes, drifting into a deeper sleep than she had expected. For the first time in days, she felt calm. She no longer worried about the discomfort she had dreaded before the flight. She felt safe, supported by the kindness of someone who had asked for nothing in return. In her heart, she promised herself she would not let this act pass without acknowledgement. Marcus did not know it then, but the story of his choice was far from finished. The long flight stretched on, hours turning slowly as the plane cut through the sky. The hum of the engines was steady, almost like a constant song in the background. Most passengers had fallen into silence, either asleep or quietly passing the time with books, music, or screens. For Marcus, time felt different. He shifted in his seat, adjusting himself again and again, but no position brought true comfort. Still, he carried no regret. Each time his legs cramped or the narrow seat pressed into his back, he reminded himself why he was here. Up in the front section of the plane, the pregnant woman rested more peacefully than she could have imagined. The wide seat gave her space to stretch, to lean back, and to take deep breaths without feeling trapped. She was aware of the comfort she enjoyed, and every moment reminded her of the man who had given it up. She had not expected anyone to notice her struggle, much less give her something so valuable. The thought weighed heavily on her heart as she rested with her hands folded over her stomach. Hours later, when the flight attendants moved through the cabin offering snacks and drinks, the woman accepted a small tray. She smiled faintly, though her mind was elsewhere. She glanced down the aisle again, her eyes searching until she found Marcus. From her place up front, she could see only part of him, but it was enough. He sat quietly, not fidgeting, not demanding attention, just calm and steady. She wondered what kind of life he lived. What kind of man would give up something so rare without hesitation? Marcus, meanwhile, accepted his own tray of snacks without looking up much. The passenger beside him had woken and was eating noisily, while the child in front had grown restless again, moving constantly in the seat. Marcus smiled politely when the mother apologized, assuring her it was fine. He understood children had energy, and he did not want her to feel embarrassed. His patience seemed endless, though inside he longed to stretch and breathe freely. After the trays were cleared, the plane lights dimmed once more. Darkness filled the cabin except for the small glow of reading lamps here and there. A quiet calm spread through the passengers. Many were asleep again, wrapped in blankets or leaning against the sides of the plane. The stillness gave Marcus time to think. He thought of his own journey, of how hard he had worked to afford the seat he had given away. But the thought did not bring regret. Instead, he found himself reflecting on the faces of people he had met in his life, times when strangers had shown him kindness in unexpected ways. He thought of his mother again, her voice echoing in his memory, telling him that giving was not about what you lost, but about what you shared. The woman in the front felt restless despite the comfort. She shifted, unable to shake the thought of what had happened. The image of Marcus standing, quietly handing her the gift of comfort, replayed in her mind. She could not let it pass unnoticed. She reached into her bag, pulling out the notebook she had carried with her. Opening it to a blank page, she began to write. At first her words came slowly, her pen pausing often as she searched for the right way to express what she felt. Then the sentences began to flow, her hand moving steadily across the page. She poured her emotions into the letter: gratitude, surprise, admiration for a stranger's selfless act. As she wrote, tears filled her eyes, though she brushed them away quickly. The words on the page became more than thanks. They became a promise that she would not forget him. She wanted him to know that his act was not small, not invisible. She folded the paper carefully, slipping it into an envelope she had carried for other purposes. She pressed it closed, holding it for a moment as though sealing her emotions inside. Back in economy, Marcus shifted once more, closing his eyes to rest. He thought about how much longer the flight might be. He tried not to count the hours, knowing it would only make the time feel heavier. Instead, he focused on steady breathing, on letting his thoughts wander. He imagined reaching his destination, stepping off the plane into the fresh air. He reminded himself that every journey eventually ends, no matter how long or tiring. A flight attendant walked quietly down the aisle, checking on passengers. When she passed Marcus, she gave him a small smile, one that seemed to carry a silent message of respect. Marcus returned the smile politely, not thinking much of it. He did not realize how much people had noticed his decision earlier. To him, it had simply been the right thing to do, nothing more. Meanwhile, the woman finished her note and tucked it away. She waited patiently, her hands resting over the envelope, ready for the right moment. She rehearsed in her mind how she might give it to him. She was not used to gestures like this. She often found herself on the receiving end of silence or indifference from strangers. But now she felt compelled to act, to show that his kindness had touched her deeply. The hours dragged and the flight continued. The air in economy grew stuffy, but Marcus sat quietly, his patience unbroken. A few times he stood to stretch when the aisle was clear, giving his legs a chance to move. When he sat back down, He noticed other passengers looking at him curiously. Some nodded respectfully, perhaps remembering the scene at the beginning of the flight. Marcus returned each look with a quiet nod, but he did not linger on it. The pregnant woman rested again, but even in her moments of sleep, she kept the envelope close. When she woke later, she asked the flight attendant if she might deliver something. The attendant agreed kindly, though the woman hesitated. She wanted to give it to him herself. It felt important to do so personally, to let him see her gratitude in her eyes. She decided she would wait until the right time, when the plane neared its destination, when everyone was preparing to leave. As the flight moved into its final hours, small details grew sharper. The hum of the engine seemed louder, the air cooler as the temperature was adjusted. The passengers stirred, stretching as they sensed the journey was nearing its end. Marcus glanced at the small map on his screen, showing the plane's progress across the country. The line was almost complete, the little plane icon inching closer to the destination. He let out a quiet breath of relief, ready for the end of the long flight. The woman in the front straightened herself, adjusting her seatbelt. She touched the envelope again, making sure it was still there. Her heart beat faster at the thought of the moment to come. She wanted Marcus to know that his choice had not gone unnoticed, that it had meant more than he could imagine. When the captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing the beginning of descent, a ripple of movement spread through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, fastening belts, closing trays, and securing belongings. The woman held the envelope firmly now, waiting for the seatbelt sign to turn off after landing. She rehearsed her words again and again, determined not to let the moment pass. Marcus sat quietly, fastening his belt and bracing for the descent. He felt the plane tilt, the hum of the engines shifting as they prepared for landing. The city lights began to appear faintly through the windows, glowing below like scattered stars. Passengers murmured softly, some excited, some relieved. Marcus simply closed his eyes for a moment, thankful the long journey was almost over. The woman opened her eyes wide, her thoughts clear. She knew exactly what she had to do next. The plane had begun its final descent, and the passengers stirred with the quiet excitement of nearing the end of a long journey. Marcus felt the subtle shift of the aircraft as it lowered through the clouds. The engines hummed steadily, and through the small window beside him, he could see the lights of the city below beginning to twinkle. He adjusted his seatbelt and straightened slightly, ready for landing. The cramped economy seat had grown more uncomfortable as the hours passed, yet Marcus remained calm, quietly reflecting on the choices that had brought him here. Up in the first-class cabin, the woman straightened herself in her seat. Her heart was racing, and her hands gripped the small envelope she had prepared. She could see Marcus sitting far back in the economy section, his head slightly bent as he watched the progress map on the small screen in front of him. She felt a rush of gratitude that made her chest tighten. She knew she wanted to do something more than just thank him with words. She wanted him to feel the weight of her appreciation, to understand how much his small act had truly mattered. The seatbelt signs dinged on and off as the plane touched the final stretch of its journey. Marcus leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He thought of the long hours in the air, the cramped seating, the bumps, and the restless passengers. But none of it mattered compared to the feeling he carried in his heart. He had given something to someone in need, and for him that was a reward in itself. It was not recognition he sought, but the quiet knowledge that he had done the right thing. The woman waited patiently, even as the flight attendants began their final checks. Her mind raced with possibilities. Should she hand him the envelope now? Should she wait until they had landed? The thought of losing the moment made her anxious, but she trusted her instincts. She had to give it to him directly. It had to be personal. The paper held not just words, but a piece of her gratitude and her story, and it deserved to reach him without delay. Marcus, meanwhile, noticed the slight commotion up front. The woman had called a flight attendant over, speaking quietly, her face intent and serious. He did not know what was happening, but he had a vague sense that it involved him in some way. He looked back down the aisle occasionally, catching glimpses of movement as the cabin prepared for landing. His curiosity stirred briefly, but he did not act. He waited patiently, letting events unfold naturally. The plane touched down smoothly, gliding along the runway. A soft cheer came from a few passengers who had been nervous about flying. The engines began to slow, and the aircraft rolled steadily toward the gate. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from his body. He could already feel the relief of finally stepping onto solid ground. The cramped seating, the restless children, and the long hours in economy seemed distant compared to the simple anticipation of disembarking. The woman watched Marcus carefully. She waited until the seatbelt signs were off, signaling that passengers could stand and gather their belongings. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood, holding the envelope close to her chest. She walked carefully down the aisle, making sure not to bump into anyone. Each step felt heavy with anticipation, her mind replaying the moment she had imagined over and over during the flight. When she reached Marcus, he looked up, slightly startled. For a brief moment, there was silence between them, a quiet pause as they both assessed the moment. Then she held out the envelope with both hands, her eyes bright and filled with emotion. Marcus blinked, surprised by the gesture. He had not expected anything, and the sight of her standing there offering him something so personal struck him deeply. I just wanted to say thank you, she said softly, her voice trembling with genuine emotion. For giving up your seat. For your kindness. It meant more than you can imagine. Marcus smiled faintly, his surprise giving way to quiet humility. He shook his head slightly. It was nothing, I just saw you needed it more than I did. That's all. The woman shook her head gently, insisting, No, it's not nothing. You made a huge difference for me today. I don't even know your name, but I wanted you to have this. She handed him the envelope carefully, her hand steady despite the emotion that bubbled beneath the surface. Marcus accepted it, feeling the weight of the paper in his hands. He looked down at the envelope, unsure whether to open it now or wait until later. The woman's eyes met his, and he felt the sincerity in her gaze, a mix of relief, gratitude, and admiration. For the first time during the long flight, Marcus felt a wave of warmth wash over him. The tiredness from the cramped seat, the restless passengers, and the long hours disappeared for a moment, replaced by the simple, human connection unfolding before him. The woman gave a small, almost shy smile. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. People like you, they make the world better. I hope one day I can pass this forward, the way you passed kindness to me. Marcus nodded quietly, still holding the envelope. He could feel a lump forming in his throat, a mixture of emotion and gratitude for the woman's words. He had given up his seat expecting nothing in return, yet here was this heartfelt acknowledgement, more valuable than he could have imagined. Thank you, he said finally, his voice low but sincere. Really? The woman smiled again, a soft, peaceful expression that made her eyes glimmer. She turned slightly, gesturing for him to open the envelope. Marcus hesitated, then carefully broke the seal. Inside, he found a neatly folded note. His eyes scanned the words, and a warmth spread through him as he read. Your kindness today will stay with me forever. You didn't just give up a seat. You gave comfort, safety, and dignity. I will never forget it. Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. Beneath the note was a small card with a simple message. Marcus held it carefully, understanding that the gesture was not about money or reward, but about recognition, gratitude, and shared humanity. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because he had been thanked, but because the woman's life had been made easier through his choice. The woman lingered for a moment, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. Marcus looked up at her, realizing that this brief encounter on a plane had created a memory neither of them would forget. She had smiled, nodded, and then returned to her seat, settling comfortably once again. Marcus watched her for a moment, feeling a quiet sense of connection with someone he had only met hours ago. Around them, other passengers had begun preparing to leave their seats. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, helping passengers with bags and ensuring the aisles were clear. The chatter of excitement and relief filled the air. Marcus carefully placed the envelope in his pocket, feeling its weight and the significance it carried. He leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath as he allowed himself a quiet smile. For the first time during the flight, Marcus felt completely at peace. The discomfort, the cramped seating, the long hours, all of it seemed insignificant compared to the human connection he had just experienced. He realized that small acts of kindness had the power to create ripples far beyond what anyone could predict. A simple choice made without expectation had led to a moment of shared gratitude and recognition. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus looked around the cabin one last time. He saw passengers gathering their belongings, some smiling, some talking quietly. but his attention remained on the woman up front, now seated comfortably, preparing to leave. He wondered if they would ever meet again, if their paths might cross once more. For now, though, it did not matter. The moment had happened, and it was real. When the plane finally stopped, the engines quieted and the passengers began to rise, Marcus felt a sense of readiness. He had experienced something meaningful, something that would stay with him long after this flight ended. He stood slowly, stretching his legs as best he could in the narrow space, and waited his turn to exit. The woman gave him one last nod as she passed him in the aisle. Their eyes met, and in that brief glance, Marcus understood the depth of her gratitude. It was not just for the seat. It was for the recognition, the care, and the human connection that had made her journey lighter. She gave a small final smile before continuing toward the exit, and Marcus returned it quietly, his heart full. As the last steps of the flight drew to an end, Marcus realized something important. The gift of kindness was not about comfort, money, or status. It was about noticing someone's struggle, making a choice, and acting without hesitation. In those few hours on a plane, he had witnessed the power of generosity firsthand, and it had left an imprint on both of their lives. The plane came to a gentle stop at the gate, the engine slowing and the hum fading into quiet. Passengers began gathering their belongings, stretching, and preparing to leave their seats. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering emotion. The cramped hours of economy seemed distant now, replaced by the weight of what had happened. He adjusted his small bag on his shoulder and prepared to stand. As people rose around him, Marcus noticed the pregnant woman in first class doing the same. She moved slowly, carefully, taking her time as she adjusted her bag and belongings. Her hands rested lightly over her stomach, and her face carried a serene expression. The flight attendants helped her, offering polite assistance, but it was clear she could manage on her own now. Marcus watched quietly, respecting her space while feeling a curious anticipation. The woman approached Marcus once more, walking down the aisle with a careful but purposeful step. Her envelope was still in her hands, now slightly worn from the hours of holding it close. She stopped in front of him, smiling softly, her eyes warm with emotion. Marcus blinked, feeling a rush of surprise and curiosity. He had already received the note earlier, but something about her presence now made the moment more personal, more real. "I just wanted to make sure you got it," she said, her voice calm, yet heartfelt. "I wanted to thank you properly, and to let you know how much it meant to me. Not just the seat, but your kindness." Marcus nodded, a quiet smile forming on his face. "You don't have to thank me again. You've already made my day by showing me that it mattered." She shook her head gently, insisting, "It's not just about making your day. It's about showing that kindness doesn't go unnoticed. People like you, they remind the world there is still goodness." Her words carried weight, and Marcus felt the truth of them resonate deeply. For hours he had given up comfort, not for recognition, but for someone else's well-being. Now, hearing her acknowledge it so sincerely, he felt a warmth in his chest that no seat, blanket, or luxury could provide. Marcus adjusted his bag and glanced around the cabin. Passengers were beginning to shuffle toward the exit, some chatting quietly, some smiling at familiar companions. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the faint scent of recycled cabin air. Marcus took in the scene, realizing that the moment he had just shared with the woman was quiet, simple, and yet profoundly impactful. The woman reached out and handed him a small, wrapped envelope. "I want you to have this." "Please," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's a token of gratitude. Something to remember that your act mattered." Marcus hesitated for a moment, looking at her. He did not expect anything, yet the sincerity in her gesture touched him. He took the envelope gently, feeling its slight weight, and nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I really appreciate it." She smiled warmly, a peaceful, almost radiant expression that made her look calm and composed, despite the fatigue of travel. "I just want you to know, small acts have big meaning. Today you made a difference for me, and that's something I will never forget." Marcus nodded again, unsure how to respond further. He realized that no words could fully capture the quiet satisfaction he felt. The gratitude in her eyes, the warmth in her expression, and the honesty in her voice were enough to make the experience unforgettable. The passengers began to move forward, and the woman walked ahead slowly, giving Marcus space. He followed behind at a respectful distance, still carrying the envelope carefully in his hand. The plane doors opened and the gentle rush of fresh air greeted them, carrying the familiar sounds of the airport, rolling luggage, announcements, and the chatter of people reuniting with loved ones. Marcus and the woman stepped off the plane into the bright light of the terminal. She paused for a moment, glancing around, then turned toward him once more. "I hope life gives you the kindness you've shown others," she said, her words soft but sincere. "You deserve it." Marcus smiled, a quiet, heartfelt smile. "Thank you. I'll remember this day for a long time." She nodded, a final gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. Then, with a careful step, she moved toward the waiting area where her family or friends must have been. Marcus watched her go, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the simple act of giving up his seat. He realized that life sometimes created these moments to remind people of what truly mattered. Not comfort, not luxury, but the simple choice to act with kindness. Once she disappeared into the crowd, Marcus found a quiet corner to open the envelope fully. Inside, he discovered the note she had written earlier, along with a small card. The note was heartfelt, expressing her gratitude in words that touched Marcus deeply. It spoke of how his gesture had changed her journey, how it had allowed her to feel safe, comfortable, and cared for during a challenging time. The words reminded Marcus of why he had acted without hesitation, confirming that small sacrifices could have profound effects. The card beneath the note contained a simple message of thanks and encouragement. Marcus held it carefully, appreciating the thoughtfulness and honesty behind it. It was not about material reward or recognition, but about acknowledging the value of kindness, the importance of noticing someone's struggle, and acting to help. Marcus felt a sense of connection with this stranger, knowing that the moment they had shared would linger in both their memories for years to come. He carefully placed the note and card in his pocket, tucking them safely away. As he walked toward baggage claim, he reflected on the journey. The cramped economy seat, the restless passengers, the long hours, they all faded in significance compared to the meaningful human connection he had experienced. The simple act of giving up his seat had led to a moment of mutual recognition, gratitude, and understanding, something that no amount of comfort could replace. Marcus reached the baggage claim area and picked up his small bag. The terminal buzzed with activity, passengers reuniting with friends and family, travelers hurrying to connections, and the quiet hum of the airport's daily rhythm. Marcus moved with a steady pace, carrying with him not just his belongings, but a sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. He thought of the woman again, hoping she had reached her destination safely, feeling comforted and supported. As he walked toward the exit, Marcus realized something important. Life often presented opportunities to make choices that required little effort, but carried immense impact. A simple act, a quiet gesture, or a small decision could transform someone's day, or even someone's life. He smiled at the thought, knowing that moments like this were rare and valuable, worth remembering and sharing with others in his own way. Outside the terminal, the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the airport grounds. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. He felt lighter, freer, and more aware of the ripple effect of human kindness. Today, he had experienced something profound. The realization that even strangers could connect through simple gestures, creating bonds that transcended distance, circumstance, and expectation. As he walked toward the parking area, Marcus thought about how he might carry this lesson forward. He imagined future moments when he could choose patience, empathy, and generosity, knowing that small sacrifices could create meaningful impact. He thought about the pregnant woman, hoping she would remember his gesture, just as he would remember hers in response. The note, the card, and the heartfelt acknowledgement. That night, as he finally returned home, Marcus placed the envelope carefully on his desk. He looked at it for a moment, then sat down, reflecting on the day. He realized that acts of kindness were never truly wasted. They left impressions that could last far longer than the moment itself, shaping memories, attitudes, and even future actions. He felt a quiet joy, knowing that he had made a difference in someone's life, however briefly, and that the experience had changed him as well. Marcus smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had begun with a decision to give up comfort, and it had ended with a meaningful connection, a heartfelt acknowledgement, and a renewed understanding of what truly mattered in life. The plane ride, the cramped seats, the long hours, all of it had been worth it. For in that small act, Marcus had discovered the extraordinary value of ordinary kindness, the power of empathy, and the lasting impact of a simple choice.